I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Good evening, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone on our other affiliated stations on Pacific Network and our people listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you may be. My name is Joe DeMare, and you are listening to For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family, your coworkers, and the birds and the bees and the trees and the fish and the seas and everyone and everything, because, like it or not, all of us are wrapped up together on this fantastic planet called Earth. And we have a fantastic show lined up for you today. We're just going to chat for the next 10 minutes or so, and feel free to call in at any time during that time at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Or you can text at 419-973-5841. That's 419-973-5841. And we'll be happy to read your text on the air. Rebecca will be calling in later, my fantastic co-host Rebecca Wood. She is still out with the flu. She's much better. She's much improved, but she does still have problems with coughing, so she decided it'd be better if she didn't come in today. And as I said, hopefully we'll be hearing from you. So after we chat for the next 10 minutes or so, then we have a rather intense interview. Our good friends of the show, the people at Roam Free Nation, we actually interviewed them at Yellowstone. We were out. It's been quite a week. I went out there. So here I am in Gardner, Montana, about to go out with the Roam Free Nation to document the terrible slaughter that's happening with the Yellowstone bison, the last wild herd in the United States. So we'll see what happens. Beginning of the week out to Bozeman, Montana, and then drove over to Gardner and then into Yellowstone Park to be with the bison. And so we have that interview coming up, something to look forward to. Then we're going to thank our sponsors, as we do every week, our wonderful, wonderful sponsors. Rebecca, as I said, will be calling in with her little piece this week, and then it's Ecological News. And that is our show every week here on For a Green Future. So thank you so much for listening. And so we'll just dive right into it here. So as I said, it's been quite a week. Last week, right after the show, basically, I hopped on a plane, went out there to Montana, and spent a couple days in Yellowstone with the folks from Roam Free Nation. And what they do is they follow the bison around. They document when they're being hunted and when they're being hazed and when they're being essentially persecuted, because Yellowstone National Park, which is the home to the last wild free-roaming bison herd in North America,
they have a plan to reduce the number of bison down to 3,500 from the current 6,500. And that's sort of an unsustainably low number, but it's the number that the cattle ranchers around Yellowstone want. So that's why they're doing it. So it was an incredible experience. I haven't been back in that area for like 30 years. Some really intense things about it, though. One, it was really unseasonably warm. This is March in the mountains. This is actually the time of year when food resources should be kind of running low and hard to get to, and this is kind of when bison start trying to get out of the park to look for more food and stuff. Instead, there was zero snow. It was extremely warm. At one point, my car thermometer said it was 70 degrees out. And so the good news there is the bison are largely staying in the park. And I saw all kinds of wildlife. As I was driving in, I got in like 1:30 in the morning Sunday night, and I actually saw a cougar. I saw a mountain lion going across the road. When I saw it, I was like, "What is that four-legged thing? Is that a dog?" But then as I got closer to it, it looked back over its shoulder after it crossed the road in front of me, and I was like, "Oh, that's a cougar." I also saw mountain goats, antelope, elk, mule deer, of course, bison, magpies, bluebirds, and it was just an incredible experience in terms of actually seeing wildlife in a natural setting, seeing wildlife in a park where they're allowed to wander around and to, follow their own migration patterns and to follow their own instincts and their own knowledge, their own societal knowledge, because, we have learned that animals like bison and mountain goats and elk, they pass information on generation to generation. They have a culture in terms of telling each other where to eat, what to do for this, what to do for that. One thing I spent some time around the Mammoth Springs up there in Yellowstone, and I saw bison tracks in the spring part where they basically have gone out and they wallow in the chemicals and like the soda and the calcium carbonate and the things that come out of those mineral springs, and they do that in order to keep down like parasites and to like sort of treat skin conditions. So they even have a medicine in their culture that they've developed, over the eons. And it was also a very intense experience because there was almost no human presence there in Yellowstone Park. Yellowstone is one of the most visited places in the world, but in March, because typically there's 3 or 4 feet of snow on the ground, they don't plow all the roads, and there's only one road open that goes from like the north of the park to the northeast of the park, and so nobody visits Yellowstone in March. There's only 834 permanent residents of Gardner, Montana, which is that little town just at the entrance to the park. And so we were driving through Yellowstone, and there was almost no one else there. So we really got to experience the nature of Yellowstone, the wilderness aspect of it, without the thousands of people lined up in cars. We would drive along, and then a car would come every like 5 minutes or so. One car would drive by, and so we saw some incredible things. One thing I'll never forget was, I saw wolves. I forgot to mention wolves in my list of wild creatures that I saw. We came across this one scene where there was sort of a marshy wetland area down off in a valley off the road, and so it was pretty far away, a couple thousand feet away, like half a mile away maybe. But there were 2 bison that had died down in that marshy area, and as we were watching, coyotes came and were like feeding off the carcass of one of the bisons. And actually, when we first came, I was looking at one of the other bison carcasses, and a magpie actually popped out of the bison. It had been like inside the chest cavity, scavenging off the dead bison. It was just a reminder of how integral bison are to that ecosystem and how integral they should be to all over the West. That's the whole point of the Roam Free Nation, is that the bison should be allowed to be free and be a part of the actual living ecosystems of the West the way they have been for millions of years. So it was really kind of an intense experience to not just get into Yellowstone, but to sort of get into Yellowstone and get a glimpse of Yellowstone if it weren't Yellowstone, if you know what I mean. Yellowstone if it were just the natural wilderness as it is meant to be, as it actually is. And that was a very humbling experience. One thing I did get to have sometimes was the experience of just silence. It's really intense when you're in a huge area. There's mountains all around you, and it's almost perfectly silent. A bird call here or there, but the quietness when there aren't humans about, when we're not running our engines and we're not racing our snowmobiles. That was another thing, is that this time of year, actually, snowmobile tours of Yellowstone are very popular, and there was no snow for the snowmobiles. And so we actually saw one poor dude just running his snowmobile down the middle of the street, just on the road, no snow around. And he looked, very sad and forlorn. And yeah, because this climate change is really picking up. And that was very apparent at Yellowstone. But it was, as I said, it was really, we got a glimpse of what the whole world could be. And we've learned over and over again that all we need to do is make space for the creatures, make space for the animals and plants that we share this planet with, and they will restore themselves. If we make it so that they can, if we don't actively disrupt them, then they will put themselves into balance. And that was very apparent there at Yellowstone. I got to see kind of a glimpse of what it was. And one of the coolest scenes that I remember is I was driving down the road towards Gardner, and there was a herd of about 100 elk just on a little ridge just to the left of the road. And as I was coming, they sort of got a little spooked. They sort of got a little panicky, and like over 100 elk were like racing together as a herd. And it just, just reminded me of what it must have been like back when the first Europeans showed up. And we have descriptions of tens of thousands of creatures, tens of thousands of bison and elk and other animals racing along together. And I saw an echo of that. I saw a shadow of that. And it was really cool. So about 50 of them actually ran across the road in front of me. The other 50 or so waited for my car to go by. But it was really cool. And it was just a reminder that even as they persecute the bison, even as they keep bison from going anywhere outside the park in Montana by shooting them, basically by hunting them, they let elk wander everywhere in Montana. In fact, they even feed elk. They even try to increase elk numbers, even though elk do actually carry the brucellosis disease that they're using as the excuse for penning the bison in. But but that was really kind of an intense experience. Like I say, the last time I went was 30 years ago, and I still remember that trip vividly, and I'll probably remember this one, hopefully, for the rest of my life also. It was very sobering, and it was very encouraging, and it was also just really beautiful. It was really a beautiful experience. And if you are somebody who can watch the YouTube version of this show, that will be up, we'll probably put that up early next week. I'll have some pictures there, and I actually, I didn't approach bison, but sometimes the bison approached us. We weren't these people that get out of the cars and try to take selfies, but there was one time I was within 5 feet of one of these huge bulls. It wasn't through my actions. The bull kind of put themselves there, and I got some really intense pictures, close-up pictures. And I did see, one guy one tourist, there were some tourists there, actually get out of his car and walk up to a herd of elk and got within like 5 feet of an elk because he wanted that selfie, he wanted that picture. And we were like, we thought we might have one of those viral YouTube videos, but luckily the elk tolerated him, and he just turned around and went back to his car. But don't do that, folks. Don't ever try to get that selfie with the bison or the elk. They're wild and they're dangerous, and they deserve respect. Okay, well, some humans that I know that deserve respect are Stephany, Seay, and Jaedin Medicine Elk, who are basically the heart of the organization Roam Free Nation. And so I did this interview with them. Very dramatic interview. Again, if you want to see something cool, watch the YouTube version of the show, because I interviewed them while we were standing in front of a field where at the other end of the field there were a group of bachelor bison, huge not old and young bulls that were just, roaming around being bison while they were talking. It was really a cool experience. So let's listen to that interview now.
Well, I guess why don't I just introduce yourselves real quick?
I'm Stephany Seay, co-founder of Roam Free Nation.
Joe DeMare, co-founder of Roam Free Nation.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for coming on. So back over your shoulders there, we're seeing some bison, right?
Yeah, there's a few bulls back there coming down into the basin. Hopefully they don't go too far north. North is that way, which is where the trap is, and then where hunters will come once they leave the boundary of the park.
Mm-hmm. And so if they head north and they come to the trap, what happens to them?
Well, it's possible that the Park Service will capture them for slaughter or for quarantine, but they don't typically capture adult bulls this time of year. And family groups, they don't typically capture them this time of year because the females are so heavy with calves. Calving season starts in just a few weeks. So really what we're worried about is them getting across the boundary into Montana and hunters showing up and gunning them down.
Mm-hmm. It's happening in West Yellowstone right now.
Mm-hmm. So you guys have been here for a few days, right? Watching the herds. What are you seeing? What are you seeing that's encouraging about this year?
Well, there's a lot of buffalo deep in the interior of the park. They're not out here, so that is encouraging, because if it had been a real winter, it's been so mild this year, if it had been a real winter, we'd see all these buffalo coming into this basin and getting into dangerous trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just say a little bit about that. Here we are, this is March. I see grass. What's the normal kind of weather around
March.
here?
Usually this time of year, Gardner doesn't get that much snow, but there's snow. But this year there's none at all. Mm-hmm. And this used to be the muddy time of year when the snow is starting to melt and you're going through mud bogs up and down this road, and it's just dry as a bone. Even in the interior of the park where it's higher elevation, there's hardly any snow at all, which is nuts. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, we're in climate chaos.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
But it sounds like this year, at least, it might be good for the bison because they're not going to come out.
It's good in the short term, mm-hmm. but in the long term, these are ice age mammals. They need the snow. They need the cold. They like the ice and freezing weather. They're built for it. They're made for it. But green-up's starting to happen right now.
Yeah.
We saw a bluebird yesterday, which is early.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So I asked what you saw that was encouraging. What have you seen that's been sort of discouraging this year?
Well, we have a couple of groups that are heading north. One that's dangerously close to the trap. Like I said, we don't think they're going to capture at this time of year, but still there's hunters that their seasons aren't over until mid-April or even later. And so if they leave the park boundary, they're going to be in trouble. Mm-hmm. And that means, there's a family group that's the closest now, adult females who are heavy with calves, and these guys are going to shoot them, and there's going to be little full-term calves in gut piles.
Yeah, we saw some of those gut piles and skeletons and things.
Yeah, Beatty Gulch is a graveyard.
Yeah. So Jaedin, you said something yesterday about the direction the bison are traveling that was kind of good. You said you'd actually like them to be able to go north, but
Yep.
but
But there's hunting. And then there's Yellowstone Capturing Department of Livestock. But we want to happen. Stephany always sits there and she always doesn't want these buffalo to head that way because of what happens if they head that way. But I said we want them to head that way with more freedom, more rights, be in a bigger landscape. So a bunch of these migration memory with the matriarch herds don't get lost. You know, these bulls, these guys out here, bachelor groups, they're gonna go wherever they want to go. But then see, when this comes to these matriarch groups, it's like they have an obligation to take care of their little herds and their babies and make sure they're eating healthy on the land, you know. And so they start heading to lower elevation to avoid the snow. Or not avoid the snow, but the snow gets too wicked and rough, and they're cratering with their faces, and eventually that gets too much, so they're like, man, let's just head down this way. We're gonna go check that out. You can smell some fresh grass still. So they start heading down this way, then they kind of get a little further, and that's when it gets a little dicey, you know, because like they say they only hunt bulls, but a lot of the times it's mainly family groups that are the ones who are getting gunned down. And we've seen that firsthand the majority of the time we're here. Doesn't happen all the time, but that's the majority of what happens here. This management, they tell them, kill these pregnant ones. We don't want these buffalo on this landscape because they're going to interfere with our public land grazing, and they're gonna bring our cattle brucellosis, and it's just like your cattle brought brucellosis to begin with, and it's like these elk, they got brucellosis in feeding lots, so letting elk, you guys are letting elk just be elk all over the place, and it's like buffalo can't even be buffalo. To me, it's a bigger issue than just elk and cattle and buffalo. To me, sometimes it feels like the dominant white culture still wants to keep that dominance that says, here's some buffalo, here's a little bit of it, but we're not giving you all of it, just a little bit of it, just a little taste to do our bidding. That's when it comes to wild buffalo, because now we've got the ITBC and they're shipping buffalo to all reservations, putting them behind fences for the rest of their lives and calling it all good. But in reality, it's like, no, all you're doing is you're taking these guys, these moms and these bulls, you're taking them away from their home, putting them on our reservations to make us feel comfortable, to make us feel all cool about it. And it's like, all you're doing is putting these guys behind. All you're doing is putting them in a prison for us, for our comfort, when it's like, I understand that's cool sometimes, but it's like, how about let's focus on us, on our reservation and our homes, and get that cleaned up and taken care of first, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Before we start trying to say, come on, wild buffalo, come be on our land now. You're home. And it's like, this is their home, Yellowstone National Park, one of the most beautiful places on the earth. This is their home. Not getting shipped across Montana, shipped over here to this state, put behind fences. This is your home now. You're back home. It's like, okay, well, it's like, where's the Prismatic Springs at? It's like, where's Old Grateful? It's like, where's Yellowstone River? It's like, this, you call this my home? It's like, you just put me on a reservation, man.
So, what would you guys like to see ideally? You know, if you could set the policy right now, people just listened to you.
Well, honestly, for me, what I think is open corridors more public land, because there's so many private ranchers who just love buffalo and they don't mind having buffalo on their land. But it's Montana who says no. So, more buffalo, larger landscape, maybe this hunt at Beatty Gulch or the central herd in West Yellowstone doesn't get annihilated the way they've been getting annihilated for the past 20 years. This plan doesn't work for these buffalo. It only works for the human. That's how I feel. Stephany has something else.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree, like 100% more buffalo on a larger landscape, placing a moratorium on these hunts so these herds can grow and flourish and expand their territory. I mean, they need to be able to express themselves on the landscape. And, we really would like to see the humans that are involved in this mismanagement to start to take responsibility for themselves and not just take from the buffalo, but give back. I mean, the reciprocity is missing entirely. It's just take. But, ultimately, and it's not going to happen under this administration, these buffalo need Endangered Species Act protection. And there's supposed to be a decision coming this year. But under this administration, I don't think we're going to have a great outcome. But yeah, a moratorium on these hunts, opening up the landscape to these buffalo, humans changing themselves. It's the human that needs to change. It's like everyone thinks that all the animals have to change, that they need to be put behind fences, or they need to be controlled, or they need to be killed. And it's like, that's not working. The earth is in trouble. And we as human beings need to step up and be responsible and fulfill an obligation that we have to the earth. We should be in relationship with the whole earth and with these buffalo who have given so much of themselves for so many thousands and thousands of years. And now they're just in a little postage stamp on the continents. And that needs to change. People need to let go. Let buffalo roam.
Wild buffalo.
Okay.
There's 50,000 domesticated. 500,000 domesticated buffalo, so that's why the issue doesn't seem so big. Now, these are wild buffalo. There's only 6,000 of them.
Yep. Okay. That's it. That was our interview. And what did you think? 877-909-1007, or you can text 419-973-5841. Periods. I'm glad I did it. It has kind of wiped me out for the week, though. When you do something like that, you don't just come home and just immediately get back into your regular routine. It kind of messes with your head a little bit, being out in the wilderness for days like that. But it is all in all, it's a very positive experience. I kind of feel rebalanced in a way, just literally just being exposed to that kind of wilderness nature experience can kind of reset all the levers in your head to where they should be. It was nice. I wish I could have stayed longer. Okay. Well, now it's time for our thanks to our patrons. Our patrons are wonderful, intelligent, physically attractive people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. And there they searched for For a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page, and they scrolled through looking at the different membership levels, chose a level that matched their budget, and now every month a little bit comes out of their accounts, comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to keep this show on the air. I said your show, and it really is your show, because I sort of feel compelled to do it, but I'm doing it for you folks, for you listeners, and we're getting more listeners every week as like more Pacifica stations come on, and I see on our podcast people are downloading hundreds of our old episodes. This is around our 370th episode or so, which tells me that more and more people are listening, and I just want to thank you folks too. And I especially want to thank, we had this past month we had a patron do a one-time donation, which you can do. You just go on there and you just choose to do it once, and that amount comes out immediately, and then you cancel the membership, so that doesn't come out every month. But we got a $600 donation, and so that was a big boost to our show. Thank you very much to all our patrons. Now it would be time for Rebecca to call. Rebecca, are you on the
Hello.
line? Yes. Hi.
I am on the line.
All right, Rebecca.
Hello.
What have you got for us this week?
Well, I've got an upset dog on my head. Baby, it's okay, sweetie. Good girl.
Tasha.
Yeah. So, anyway, in my on the War in Becca's neighborhood indoor lawn,
Uh-huh.
I have been noticing a lot of holes in my neighborhood in the ground lately, and I don't think they're all the same thing. Like some of them are really pretty tiny, and like too small for a rat, And other ones are a little bigger. I don't know. They could be rats. They could be baby woodchucks. I do not know what's going on, but one possible source of the holes in my front lawn in the dirt would be cicada killing wasps, which I'm so sorry if I've already done these. I don't think I have offhand, but
cicada
So,
killing wasps.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about in this episode, which I'm calling "The Stories Full of Holes." Ha 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 ha. So there's a thing called the Eastern Cicada Killer, which would make sense because there's a tree on my front lawn. It's a pine tree, and it seems to have a lot of cicadas coming out of it, and also a lot of wasps periodically. But yeah, the Eastern Cicada Killer is called Specius speciosus, which, wow, that is a little bit of a poser there, but that's my best guess of how it's pronounced. It is a large solitary digger wasp, which makes sense because there were all these wasps around last year, but we couldn't find like one big wasp nest anywhere. We were trying because the mailman got mad at us and wouldn't deliver our mail anymore because there were too many wasps on either side of our sidewalk and flying back and forth over our sidewalk, although they never actually hurt anyone, and there was no nest to step on. So they were really pretty much minding their own business, but yeah, people get a little nervous about wasps because some of them are stingy and ouchy. But what these things do, basically, their whole life is that they find a cicada and paralyze it by stinging it and use it as a nursery for their larvae, drag it back into their little underground burrow, individual burrow that it dug. And so yeah, it's not unlike the blue mason bees that we talked about last year. It's you think of so much, you think of insects as being eusocial, but not all of them are. Some of them just like to do their own thing, I guess. So, yeah, it confirms here that cicada killer wasps are not aggressive towards humans, drives with our experience, if that's what they are. And the males don't even have stingers. They don't even have stingers. The females only sting if they are handled roughly. So, at that point, if you picked up a wasp and were just kind of poking it with one finger, whatever happens is pretty much on you, I think. But, yeah, it confirms they like sunny, well-drained soil. Our front yard is kind of sandy. It's got that pine tree there. It's very sunny and dry in the front yard. And, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that if you pick up a huge wasp and start, messing with it, that, you deserve what you get.
Pretty much at that point. But, yeah, they overwinter as larvae in their cocoons, and a way you can get rid of them is to just keep your soil moist. So, we don't have to spray and have all the drama again. We can just water the front yard basically, which is tiny, so that shouldn't be. We don't have a hose, I don't think, but we'll figure something out. But anyway, the benefits of this animal are that it's free natural pest control and incidental pollination. It's running around and accidentally pollinate stuff, I guess. I don't know why. I mean, do they need to? I guess maybe they need to eat as adults. That's an interesting question. Like, do they eat as adults, or some insects don't? They just eat as larvae, and all they do is breed as adults. But yeah, they protect trees from too much damage from the cicadas, and they aerate the soil through nesting, which makes sense. Our front lawn is full of little burrow holes. Drawbacks would be Heavy nesting can kill grass or other plants. It can destabilize retaining walls or presumably hillsides or whatever. So not extensive, really. That's not much of a drawback for a critter. And some threats to it would include habitat alterations, like, for example, if I soak our front yard with water, mostly in the form of soil moisture, or putting down like heavier turf, which it's harder for them to break up. Insecticides, which we unfortunately had to do last year because otherwise we would never get our mail again. Although we didn't know the thing about just soaking them. And also, there's a thing called velvet ants, which are actually a form of wasps, which like to do pretty much to cicada killer wasps what they do to cicadas, where they, not exactly. What they do is sneak into the cicada killer's burrow, lay some eggs, and then the eggs eat the pupa form of the wasps. So this is another thing, it's just like, it's a damn soap opera in my yard. Seriously, all kinds of people fighting tooth and nail, and insects and plants fighting each other, and it's just, they're all ready to rumble, Joe.
Yeah, it's very complicated. Lots of different gangs in that little patch of yard you got there. All right. Well, thanks for calling, Rebecca, and glad you're feeling better. And looking forward to having you in studio next week.
I am so glad I had the flu for like 2 weeks, and it was not getting any better at all whatsoever until I recovered partially from my pigheadedness and went to the ER about it.
Well, I'm glad you did. So, all right. Thanks, Rebecca.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, that opens up a line at 877-909-1007. Do you have cicada killer wasps in your yard? What do you think of them? They're really pretty impressive critters. Okay, on to ecological news, and our first story. David Suzuki, famous environmentalist, turned 90 years old, and they had a nice interview with him in CBC, the Canadian Public Broadcast Company, on March 22nd. The title of the article was, at 90, David Suzuki says he has done everything he could to protect the earth, but fears he has fallen short. And his most famous program, he had a series called The Nature of Things, which was very popular all over the U.S. and Canada back around in the 1980s and 90s. He started out as a scientist and a broadcaster, but the more he reported on nature, the more he felt that actually he had to personally step in and try to help protect it. So he became a very famous activist. He was one of the first major public figures to talk about global warming. And, this is one of the reasons global warming was one of the big issues in the 2000 election. It was really to the point where the Republican candidate actually had to say, okay, I'm going to do something about global warming also. He was lying, of course, but, it was a huge national issue. People cared about it. People do still care about it, but people are still electing politicians now that are putting us in the opposite policy that we need. He has a new memoir out, a book called Lessons from a Lifetime. And he shared one of his life experiences in this interview. He ran for student council when he was in high school, and he came back and he was telling his father about some of the way he'd responded to like questions during the campaign, and he was proud that he was giving all these really politically savvy, middle of the road kind of wishy-washy answers to these questions so that he wouldn't offend anybody, wouldn't turn off anybody. And his father actually blew up at him and said, if you want to be liked by everybody, then you're not going to stand for a GD thing. And that kind of helped shape him after that, where he realized that either you have to be liked by everyone or you have to take a stand. And so he chose for the rest of his life to be one of those take a stand people. He says in this interview that our legal, economic, and political frameworks are all being taken in the wrong direction, and that what he said is they no longer reside in a web of relationships, which is a very David Suzuki way of saying that nature has been cut out of the decision-making processes, that that the people in power, like the people who are pushing for the bison relocation and the bison hunting, have left what the world needs, the natural world needs, out of all their equations, which is a terrible thing because we are still utterly dependent on that natural world. And so if it falls, we fall. No matter how economically healthy we seem to be, physically, our society can't continue without the backup that the natural ecosystems give us. So a nice article about David Suzuki, and he's made it to 90. So don't know how much longer he'll be with us, but we're grateful for the 90 years we've gotten. Okay, next story. This kind of illustrates what David Suzuki's saying about our politicians are just doing the wrong things here. This is in signalohio.org on March 24th, and the title is Ohio Officials Vote to Kill Solar Farm in Morrow County. And we have been reporting on this because this proposed solar farm, which was called Crossroads Solar, it would have been a $98 million development on 726 acres. It was being developed by a company called Open Road Renewables, which has actually successfully developed about $1 billion worth of solar fields in Ohio prior to this. But this would have been a 94 megawatt show, or a 94 megawatt solar system. And the Ohio Power Siting Board, basically, when they were looking at the application, they didn't find anything wrong technically. They didn't find anything wrong environmentally because, they always have to do these massive environmental impact studies. There was nothing questionable engineering-wise, but some of the township trustees and county commissioners came out against it. And what happened was there were also a whole bunch of public comments, but it turned out, and this is what we reported on a few months ago, that the majority of them were fake. A majority of them had no connection to actual people. They were just sort of random names stuck on these comments that didn't have, actual addresses, or, there were no people behind these comments, but the majority of them. If you got rid of the questionable ones, the ones that didn't seem to have any humans behind them, then the real comments were 2-1 in favor of the solar system. But this would have put in $1 million per year to the local economy. They were going to pay about $250,000 a year in taxes, which in Morrow County, Ohio, is a huge chunk of their budget. So there would have been all kinds of public benefits to it. This was one of those solar developments where they were going to graze sheep underneath the solar fields, and so it would have been, would have stayed agricultural land. It would have continued to produce agricultural products, but the Ohio Power Siting Board has killed it. The company, Open Road Renewables, is planning to appeal, but the company has also stated that even though they've developed $1 billion worth of solar so far in Ohio, that they will not be attempting any new projects here because they said the political landscape is just too hostile. That the Republican parties that are controlling almost all these counties are too invested in preventing renewable energy from happening. And so that's a big loss for Ohio, both monetarily and environmentally. Okay, and on to our next story, which ties right in with why people are opposing things like solar fields. This is a story in Renew Economy back on March 24th. And it turns out that disinformation turns out to be a huge industry. Disinformation specifically about climate change and renewable energy. The title is how climate and renewables disinformation networks are fueling a major national security threat. And this Renew Economy is based in Australia. And they had an intelligence analyst, her name was Anastasio Capetas, and she did this report and basically found that all the disinformation about renewable energy and about the global climate change has been undermining both Australia's energy sovereignty and its ability to protect the country from external threats. It's called, basically there's what's called the climate disinformation war, and it's been going on for about 20 years. I mentioned back in the 2000s how everybody in the world was concerned about global warming. Well, that is also when the fossil fuel companies decided to put serious money into creating disinformation about things like climate change and renewable energy. And so they've been going at it for more than 20 years, and it's a multi-billion dollar industry now. There was a report that it's sort of a drift towards authoritarian politics comes along with this, because once you start telling disinformation about basic physical things, that kind of clears the way for the big lie, the huge lie, which is we need, democracy is no good. We need a strong man. We need a dictator to try to fix everything. Because once you start lying, sort of lies kind of tend to take you in that direction. At Rupert Murdoch's big, huge information conglomerate is part of this. And what these anti-environmental companies are trying to do, PR companies are trying to do, they're not so much trying to convince people about their positions, because those positions are easily disproven. They're just not factual. But what they're trying to do is degrade, this is from the report, degrade the information environment so that people can't make any decisions, so that people can't say, accept basically the facts, because they're constantly questioning the basic facts, which puts people into basically a situation of paralysis. People feel like they're not going to act because everything's still kind of muddy. And I saw a great example of that just the other day on X, when somebody put up this big post and says there's no consensus on global warming, because they found like 3 or 4 people who work for the fossil fuel companies who are like, oh no, there is no such thing. But, of course, as we know, people who listen to the show, it's 99.9% of the atmospheric scientists both understand that there is global warming and are desperate for us to start doing something about it. And to give you an idea of the scale of this, this report, which is in Australia, identified just one PR company called Clean Creatives, which has a budget of $7 billion every year. And so when you see somebody try to post something good about wind and solar, and you immediately see that list of trolls come down, spouting disinformation, a lot of those people are hired by companies like Clean Creatives, who have multi-billion dollar budgets. And that's just one PR company in Australia. And can you imagine how many there are in America that are spending, more multi-billions of dollars in order to keep pushing the false narratives about clean energy? They also found that in Australia that the oil companies, the fossil fuel companies, coal and oil and natural gas, donated $7 million to politicians in the last election, which to us Americans sounds like peanuts, but it's a big deal in Australian terms. They also found that that there's a lot of abuse and threats and intimidation that is going along with this disinformation, because if you get convinced that solar panels poison the groundwater, if you get convinced that solar panels or wind turbines cause cancer, you are going to get very defensive, and some people take it to the point of threatening other people with abuse, and it's not a good situation. Okay, next story. We got to kind of move along here, and this is on March 23rd, 2026. CNN.com is where I got most of my information for this, but you've probably heard this one. This one actually seeped into the mainstream news, and that is that Trump will pay a French company $1 billion in taxpayer funds to not build wind farms. That's right. A company called Total Energies. They had permits, they had leases to put offshore wind turbines up in the Atlantic Ocean. And Trump basically wrote them a check and said, I hate windmills. Don't build windmills. Here's $1 billion. Go build fracking. Go do more fracking. And so that's what they're going to do. They took the $1 billion. They're going to use it to build a liquid natural gas plant terminal in Texas. They're going to use it for fracking, and they're going to ship fracked gas to Europe. That's their new business model. The Interior Secretary Burgum, when he announced this, again, disinformation, said that wind is one of the most expensive forms of energy, when, of course, it's one of the cheapest. It has zero fuel costs. It doesn't have the fluctuation in price that we're seeing with things like natural gas and oil right now, because the wind is actually quite predictable. If you do several years of study, you can very accurately predict how much power your wind farm is going to make year to year. Elizabeth Klein, who was the former director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, basically says this makes no sense at all. And there's still about $5 billion in wind farm leases that are still out there. And there's a lot of speculation that the Trump administration is going to do the same thing with all the other offshore wind leases and just pay them companies not to build wind turbines, which is not what I want my tax dollars spent on, preventing wind turbine installations. Okay, next story, nature.com. And this is this falls under the heading of positive feedback loop. This study says, the title is, Dry Soils Lose More Carbon When Warm. So it's kind of makes sense that if you bake the soil, you're going to get more carbon dioxide out of it than if it's moist, which means that when there's drought and heat, the soil puts carbon into the air. This is why when you clear cut a forest, it continues to put CO2 into the atmosphere for about 20 years before it becomes a net CO2 absorber again, because there's tons and tons of carbon locked in the soil in the terms of fungi and bacteria and worms, and all those living things are all made out of carbon. And so if you have soil that's moist and cool, it continues to absorb carbon. If you make it hot and dry, it keeps putting carbon into the atmosphere. And the quote is, a massive carbon store in soils vulnerable to anthropogenic warming, which is global warming. Now a study shows that climate-driven changes in precipitation can mediate soil carbon responses to warming with drought-amplifying carbon losses. So basically it's saying that there's a positive feedback loop, that the more carbon we put in the air, the hotter and drier the soil gets. And so then the soil puts more carbon in the air, which makes the soil hotter and drier, etc. We've talked about this many times. And that's the one lesson I hope all our listeners take away, is that we are caught in a positive feedback loop, and the only way out of a positive feedback loop is to stop the input. Once we stop putting carbon in the air, everything will rebalance, and we'll again have a functioning system, which climate scientists are saying that we have a tremendous energy imbalance right now because the Earth is not being able to cool itself fast enough. But if we stop putting carbon in the air, the Earth can catch up and bring us back to balance. So that's very close to it for our show. And this whole idea of balance, I got to see a balanced ecosystem in Yellowstone. And a balanced ecosystem is an abundant ecosystem. That's why I saw hundreds of antelope and hundreds of mountain goats and thousands of elk and thousands. In our drive through Yellowstone, there's about 6,500 bison in Yellowstone Park. We might have seen about almost half of them in our drive through. We saw thousands, and it was really just a reminder of what an abundant, balanced ecosystem can produce. And that's what we need to get to. And that's what that's why I called this show A Green Future, because I still believe we can get to it if we just sort of come to our senses. And one of the symptoms that we may be coming to our senses was yesterday's No Kigs rallies. Apparently this was another record. The estimates are about 9 million people in the United States were out on the streets yesterday. I was there from about 11 to 1 at Bowling Green, and it was really just a joyous occasion. People singing, people chanting, everybody happy, no crosswords, no anger being yelled at each other. It was really showing that we want to come together and fix these problems. So let's just go ahead and do that. What do you think? All right, that's it for our show this week. Very happy to have been here to talk with you again. Once again, if you wanted to become a patron, you would go to patreon.com, Patreon, and search for A Green Future. If you want to comment on this show, you send an email to Joe DeMare, that's DEMARE, for A Green Future, FOR, agreenfuture.org. And then you can send me an email and just let us know how we're doing. Do you like what we're doing? Do you have suggestions? We're always overjoyed to hear from our listeners. And I think I should be hearing that theme song pretty soon here. But feel free to ask us any questions on any environmental topic. And we'll be back next week with Rebecca in studio. Once again, thank you for listening. Let's get through this together. This is Joe DeMare signing off.
Better than crud. I like birds and things creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.